in terms of what we're going to cover tonight. So as I say, cholesterol, and cholesterol specifically during menopause, because it's, something wild happens in menopause in terms of outputting hormones and things like that, and impacts on cholesterol. Controlling the highs and lows, and we've spoken about this before, this idea of making sure the peaks and the troughs get flattened out, because that's where we're going to save ourselves storing any body fat. Okay, and then, as I say, supplements that we'll deal with that will be specific to menopause. Okay, so covering why it's important and other bits and pieces. And some of you may know, either of you may know, Jenny, you've been maybe more actively tuned into the keto thing and the NOX thing for a while, but Elsner, maybe you've also you are aware of this idea around how to test cholesterol these days, which is very different to how we used to test cholesterol. Unfortunately, it's still very mainstream is using the old testing protocols, which really aren't very useful to us. But I'll explain what those numbers mean and why it might be important to actually look at a more progressive way of testing your cholesterol. And then we'll deal with dietary stuff as well, because of course that comes up all the time, especially with the keto diet. Oh my God, it's so much fat. Isn't it going to, put cholesterol through the roof? So we'll talk about that as well, and statins, of course, which is a big one. Okay, so you can see from this slide that cholesterol is actually an incredibly important hormone. It is, everyone always talks about this idea of dropping it down and forcing it lower, but actually there really isn't any point, because it's so incredibly important, and particularly for heart function. So, I think we've gotten to a point where there's a bit of a frenzy about this cholesterol thing, and I have to say that, I think certainly not to be someone who is emotive about the topic, and I don't think it's any conspiracy theory. I think just it is one of Big Pharma's biggest selling drugs. And so from a commercial point of view, it works for them. And the fact that they've managed to get the buy-in of most mainstream medical practitioners. So it is a message that just keeps getting given, is that, oh, you must bring your cholesterol down, you must bring it down, you must bring it down. It's absolute rubbish from a point of view of menopause. You want it to be rising because it offers protection. And we'll see now why. But you can see it's got so much value. Most of it we get from our liver, so we produce what we need, but the other source is animal protein, and that's why also I have a fundamental issue with plant-only diets. For whatever other reason, this is a very important one. We need the cholesterol. So you may or may not know that the composition is your triglycerides, blood triglycerides, which when they test, they always want to see are low. Okay, that's an indicator of good health, or the reverse is an indicator of some kind of potential problem. You've got high density lipoproteins, which were always called good cholesterol because they tend to carry blood away from the heart, whereas LDLs, low density lipoproteins, carry towards the heart, and they were classified as bad cholesterol. But all these terms are very foolish, because there's no real thing. Look, bad cholesterol, LDL, comes in shapes and sizes. And I think this is the thing that we've fundamentally got to understand. So LDL is comprised of, it's basically made up of various particle size proteins. And the thing is that the smaller those particles are, the more chance they have of getting into an artery and becoming oxidized and then causing damage to that artery. So the smaller the LDLs are, the more problematic. The larger they are, the less of an issue they are altogether. So nowadays, what we look for is the density of those LDLs. It's the density or the size, particle size that we're interested in, not how many there are overall. So, and the very, very small ones are called VLDLs, or very low density lipoproteins. And those are the ones we want to watch for, because they're the ones that can get through that lining of the artery, oxidize, cause the damage, and then cause cholesterol to rise unnecessarily. Because, of course, what happens is that when they oxidize and they cause damage to the artery wall, the body will react by saying, oh, there's damage here. We need to produce more cholesterol in the liver to band-aid against this area, because it is essentially a band-aid. It repairs the area of inflammation. And so what do we do when our cholesterol rises? We just shoot the messenger. Cholesterol is the messenger, and it tells you that there's inflammation. So I remember going to see a medical homeopath, a Belgian medical homeopath in Port Elizabeth. There was some function and he was talking there, and it was fascinating. And he was saying, you know, his analogy is, well, when you see a car crash and then within seconds you see an ambulance, let's imagine you're an alien looking at planet Earth from space, and you see car accident, ambulance, car accident, ambulance, car accident, ambulance. Eventually you might think that the ambulance is causing the car crash because the association is so strong. It's the same with cholesterol. Cholesterol's not causing the problem. Cholesterol's trying to fix the problem. And what do? We just kill the messenger. It's the most unbelievable. Next to the weight loss industry promoting low fat as a way of keeping lean, this one for me comes as an equal. It's like, hey, let's kill the very thing that's trying to actually repair the area and call that the problem. So it doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, yeah, so basically all of that is about trying to eat a diet and form a lifestyle that promotes larger LDL particle sizes and not the smaller ones. The HDL basically reduces localized oxidation, okay, because it's got these nutrients that are antioxidants. So they actually, and that's why they call it the good cholesterol, is it reduces inflammation, and in doing so it protects the artery. So you actually always want your HDL levels really high, you want your triglycerides low, and you want your VLDLs low, but if your LDLs are high, really doesn't matter. So in fact, and I remember reading, I think it was in the book that I mentioned last week, Big Fat Surprise by Nina Tickholz, or however you pronounce it. She spoke about, I think it was either her or Gary Taubes, with his book, Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It, which is also very interesting. But speaking about, where was I going with this? What was I saying?
About cholesterol? The bad.
Yeah. That the research showed that actually HDL is a better marker to understand whether you're at risk of heart disease than LDL is. But LDL got the publicity. And so we ran with that in the same way germ theory got the publicity versus terrain theory, which is about, you know, the state of your body rather than just being germ phobic. And so HDL just didn't really get registered, but it is the more important marker. So as long as HDL is high and as long as triglycerides are low, and we now know we can test for VLDLs, then we've got a full picture. Then it's very much easier to understand what we need to look for. Okay. The effects of menopause are that cholesterol rises, and we want it to rise. And again, this medical homeopath said that he never worries in a female of menopausal age. He expects to see it at around about 6.5, 7. Now, if you ever go to a doctor and your cholesterol's that high, they're going to, you know, have a fit, and they're going to want it below 5, or they're going to want it at least as close to 5 as possible. So it acts as an antioxidant, so we definitely want it for protection. And the problem is that as the estrogen lowers, because estrogen actually affords us protection against heart disease and cancers, but as that drops, we become more at risk, and that's why cholesterol rises, to provide that extra protection. So we also need it for brain and joint function, to produce bile, and we already know that bile is an issue because of estrogen dropping. So we actually want all these alternates, because what else would we do? You know, as a menopausal woman, we need to, and our bodies have obviously responded over time. They've kind of adapted to this drop, and they provide an alternate way to offer that protection. Very interesting that research shows that women with lower levels of cholesterol are much more prone to depression, heart disease, strokes. So it's there to offer us protection against all sorts of things. So there's no way we want to drop it down. And in fact, he was saying that even with someone with cholesterol that's gone, he says over 8, he'll test. So he'll do an ECG just to make sure there's no damage around the heart. There's nothing happening there. VLDLs aren't causing any problems. And if it's still okay, he might try and bring it down a little bit. But he seemed very happy with a figure of, up to 7 for your standard menopausal woman. And you never hear that, do you? You never hear that 7 is okay. Causes of heart disease, I'm just going to let you read through this, but most, you'll know this. It's the obvious things. You don't want those plant oils that have been heat extracted that cause massive, they're rancid by the time you eat them. So they cause, they're susceptible to oxidation and then cause problems in the body. Fructose, which has been extracted, it's fruit sugar. Fructose is perfectly fine in fruit because you've got the fiber and the water with it. But the minute you take it out of fruit, it becomes just a pure sugar, and that affects the liver quite profoundly. High fructose corn syrup. I don't know that we have a huge amount of that in this country. I think it's very much an American thing, high fructose corn syrup. Okay, so also grains. So you don't want too many of the grains because that's where your small particle sizes are promoted, is excess grain intake. So that promotes the VLDLs. Keep temperatures down. We've spoken about that. Go low and slow because of those compounds. Smoking is an obvious one. Inactivity is an obvious one because of that. Again, HDL, as I say, is more protective. Well, it gives you a better idea of the protection your heart is experiencing. And exercise boosts those levels anyway. So it's a no-brainer for activity. And then, of course, the higher your stress, the more a possibility of heart issues occurring. So you always want to be trying to keep emotional stress to a minimum, which of course is easier said than done. And then going to talk about statins. I'm always amazed that the heart is a muscle. And if a side effect to statins is muscle weakness and pain, isn't the heart going to be affected by those statins? I mean, there's nothing that tells the statins not to affect the heart. So this idea that statins, and by the way, absolutely no research has shown that it provides any sort of value to women, ever, ever, ever. And I remember Noakes saying the same. And I also remember Noakes saying that the only group that might show like that much more protection, which is just not worth the side effect risk, is males between the age of 50 and 60, I think, but certainly not for females. So this and no matter, sorry?
What is statins?
It's the typical cholesterol lowering drugs that they give you when your cholesterol is too high. Sorry, Elson, I should have said that there. Yeah, they are typical cholesterol drugs, basically.
Right.
And the thing that no matter how many clients I've seen over the years that have been on statins, not one of them has ever been told to take coenzyme Q10. And that is a massive, massive, statins reduce or deplete coenzyme Q10, which is a very, very important nutrient, as you can see, for muscle function. And once again, the heart is a muscle. You don't really want to be playing around with, the irony is, of course, statins are promoted as heart protection. Peripheral neuropathy is a big one, so that kind of almost sensitivity in the extremities. And for some people, it's extreme to the point where they struggle to walk. And you can see all these other issues, cognitive impairment, low blood pressure, and cancer. So all studies with rodents show that statins equate to a cancer risk. They haven't had a rodent study where they haven't developed cancer from statins. And we typically use rodents because they're very, very close to humans in terms of the genetic makeup, weirdly enough. Pancreatitis, so that's just inflammation in the pancreas. And as I said, no study, no benefit, no decrease in mortality for females at all. So if anyone ever suggests that you need statins, you know what you can tell them to do with their statins. Okay. Dietary fats and cholesterol. So here's a quote. I think this is fabulous because this was a while ago, and we're still a little behind. South Africa actually is far ahead of the UK, and I think that's just down to Noakes and all the public profile stuff around it. And I remember going to hear him talk when my daughter was at Montessori and he first came into doing all of this. He came across a book written by two researchers who I knew because obviously I had already been using keto and low carb, high fat for many years because I learned about it when I was last in London. I did some coursework and I was very interested in it. And anyway, it was a room full of a hall full of people. And at the and I thought, well, I might as well use this to promote my business. So I stood up and I said to him, you've been really good for business because you've created this, this whole new thing that I've, obviously been working with for a long time, but you've now made almost a household name. And so that was very good for me. Is everyone's sort of starting to go, oh, what is this low carb, high fat thing, this keto thing? But in 2015, the USDA, which is the United States Dietetics Association, said the available evidence shows no appreciable relationship between consumption of dietary cholesterol and serum cholesterol. So cholesterol is not a nutrient of concern for overconsumption. And that was in 2015. So already then they were saying there's absolutely no issue with consuming your dietary fats. It's your carbs, it's your foods that cause inflammation. Those are the problems. So it's your damaged fats, it's your processed carbohydrates. So when we look at the low carb, high fat diet and cholesterol, this is a quote from the Journal of Sports Medicine. So these diets, so low carb, high fat, consistently improve all markers. So they lower elevated blood glucose, insulin, triglyceride. ApoB or ApoB is a test that measures the amount of a certain type of protein on the surface of cholesterol. And it's the main protein found in LDL. Okay. So it reduces your VLDL particle sizes, blood pressure, body weight, while it also increases low HDL. And you want that. Remember, we want that as high as we can. So the benefits are enormous. And I find, I remember Noakes saying this, and it had been my own experience, is that initially cholesterol will rise. So when you start adding a whole lot of fat into the diet, those levels will rise, but then they'll settle again. And they settle normally within a month or two. They settle back down to an optimal, whatever the optimal is. And that's the point with a low carb, high fat diet is to me, it's an optimizer of weight. So you don't typically, unless you do a keto, an extreme keto, you don't become too thin. And if you need to pick up weight, you'll pick up and normalize weight. So in the same way, it'll normalize cholesterol levels. So I like it because it seems to be a settling kind of way to a settling approach, dietary approach. Okay, so that's the cholesterol story. We're going to move on to this glycemic variability topic. So looking at controlling blood sugar. And when you do that, you control weight. That is the key to making sure you don't gain body fat, is to control blood sugar. Okay, so what is it? I've said to you it's the peaks and the troughs related to the swings of blood glucose over a given period. And so we already know that, the higher your blood glucose goes on a regular basis. We spoke about this, where you then produce insulin, and insulin then comes into the bloodstream, pulls out the glucose, has to decide what to do with it. It's going to go and knock on the cell doors. It's going to go to the liver cells. It's going to go to the muscle cells. And over time, if that keeps happening, those cells become deaf to that signal. And so the risk of diabetes is very high when blood glucose levels are consistently high. large and frequent changes in that variability. In other words, what they're saying is extreme highs and extreme lows in and of itself can contribute to shortened longevity, so a shorter lifespan and health issues. So you really, in all ways, you want to keep yourself as stable as possible. And I notice it's quite interesting because I'm perimenopausal, as I said, so I get my period, and I know, and I follow the protocol, Elsa, that we spoke about for you in terms of whether we, looking at the loop and where you were in your cycle. But I noticed that, I mean, it's always happened to some degree, but I notice these days, even on my high carb day, I have to be careful how much processed, and when I say processed, I'm talking about either maybe some carb crackers, some oat crackers, or maybe a gluten-free bread or something like that. Even that, it's too processed in a short space of time. And I know when blood sugars hit for me because I get very thirsty. I immediately am thirsty. So it tells me that blood sugar has risen. So even that, I now have to sort of modulate and almost do half of what I was able to do before. And I guess that's just because estrogen is coming down and I have to kind of adapt to it. So interesting to kind of be aware of that sensitivity is reducing. Inflammation and blood sugar. So there is this very, very important interplay between glycemic variability and inflammation. The two are very linked. And it's important to know that you can actually, you can convert fat cells into something more useful to you. But you have to do that outside of having chronic inflammation occur in the body. So the first thing you want to do is take care of any sort of inflammation. And that's the reason that I typically ask clients to fill in that first questionnaire that we did with the graph, is because it shows me where there might be inflammation occurring. And it's important to get those things right before you can expect to see this, really consistent reduction in body fat and the leaning happening. The body, prioritizes things fundamentally, but a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate that. They want to see the results instantly, and they don't really understand that there's a whole lot of other things going on. A friend of mine, my tech guy, who's a very good friend, he's been a smoker since he was 14. He's 49. And he stopped now, and he has stopped for periods before, but and he was really struggling with things like a bit of body fat, with things like energy, blah blah blah. And I kept saying to him, basically, you've been suppressing everything. This is the same with any inflammation. When it's happening consistently, you suppress the body's response systems. And often I think it just operates on survival mode. And then the minute you take that stressor out, or the inflammatory thing out, suddenly all these kind of things pop up. And then you think, but I've just stopped that habit. I should be feeling better, not worse. But often it's just because the body's now playing around with this thing without that added stress, and it's saying, okay, we need to deal with this. So we bring it to the surface, we make sure it's then addressed. And then it slowly starts. It's this weird, almost extreme reaction that the body has. And I have a lot of clients who've had similar experiences with that. Chronic inflammation itself causes excess insulin. And that, of course, we don't want, because the minute we have excess insulin, the potential for resistance is very high. And in any event, we know that in menopause, we are very insulin resistant anyway, because insulin sensitivity is linked to estrogen levels. So the minute estrogen is low, you've lost your chances of being sensitive to insulin. So you've got to be really cautious with it. So there are things that you can do to avoid storing fat, and these are quite nifty little things that you can do. There's a quote here from Ben Greenfield. I read his book when I was researching my own. You have to sort of read competitor books, and I must have read about 5 or 6 other books. His is amazing. He's quite extreme in the sense that his plan is to live to about 180. And there are a number of key people actually on this planet who that's their main drive, is the longevity. And they're eating for their mitochondria. So they've already established that, I think I said this to you girls, if you feed a fetus from its, its starting point, and you feed the body that's housing the fetus and then the infant, and then give birth to that, and then you continue to feed the mitochondria of that infant, 180 is not unachievable at all. It's just about keeping inflammation down, and it's about preserving the telomere length in the DNA and the mitochondrial function. So, yeah, that's his thing. He says if glycemic variability is out of control, blood sugar is too high, you've got two choices. Either your body's going to shovel that fat into the cells, shovel the sugar into the cells that can utilize it as fuel, or it's going to store it. So you know what you wanted to do. I mean, you wanted to use it in the liver and the muscle cells. And in that case, you've got to be active. You've got to promote the use of that energy. And we'll show you how to do that. Okay. Are you guys following me? Are you happy at this point? Elsner, you're right? Okay, perfect.
Yes, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay, lovely. So we've got, I think, 5 or 6 things that you can do. Strength training, Jenny.
Yeah.
Strength training is a number one, huh? Because you push glucose into the cells. It's a beautiful way to make sure the body utilizes energy. It takes, that's energy we consume orally, and then the body wants to store, and you force it to utilize it, because the muscles use glucose. To lift a weight, you've got to have glucose in the muscle. So it's a lovely way to push the glucose in and make the body use it as fuel. Even light training can do that, okay? So as a menopausal group, we definitely want to push for as much sensitivity to insulin as we can muster, okay? Cardio in the morning in a fasted state. So it could be, it doesn't have to be anything heavy. It could literally be a 20-minute walk. You guys are getting the sun now, it's warming up. So you almost sort of want to get out into a lovely morning and just take a stroll. Maybe you've got a dog you can take with you, something low key. I mean, I used to use I haven't been back to the gym as frequently now because I'm teaching every second day, but just a walk to the gym would be sufficient for me, even, just in natural light, because that's also very good for sleep quality, which we'll talk about, because natural light first thing in the morning improves your melatonin output, which improves sleep quality. So there's lots of reasons you would want to get out into natural light first thing in the morning, and this is another one. So there's your light jog, Jenny.
Yes.
Walking after eating. So there's another thing you can do is just take a stroll, have a meal, whether it's the evening meal at lunchtime, or if you can manage it for both, just take a little amble. It's something like, it reduces your, if I'm not mistaken, it's something like up to about 13%. You can reduce the fat stored by up to 13% if you just walk after eating.
Sure.
Because it's what's circulating, and so you're just resisting that getting stored. Just that little extra bit getting stored. So none of these are necessarily in and of themselves going to make an extraordinary difference, but you put them together and you've suddenly got a program for staying out of trouble. Stand more often, so switching. This is a constant thing for me. I always try to be standing within half an hour of sitting. If not, definitely within an hour. And then when I'm up for at least 5 to 10 minutes. But ideally, it should be maybe 2 minutes every half an hour. Or just have a standing desk or work at a dresser that allows you to operate with the hands, the elbows at 90 degrees, so that you've got your hands on the keypad or just at a very comfortable angle or height. But this constant changing is very important. That reduces blood sugar spikes as well. So as much as you can. Elsner, I think you're very active anyway, because you're.
I walk up and down all day in the studio.
Yeah. And Jenny, I mean, you're pretty active too in terms of your teaching, so that's great. And it's been the biggest change for me since COVID and the lockdowns in this bloody country, which would be extreme, is that my day really was all about standing and teaching in a class, standing and teaching a client on the gym floor. And the only seated work I did was for work like this, where I would actually work with them consulting on nutrition and lifestyle management. So I had an incredibly active existence. And now, because I'm doing so much online work, and in there are times where I speak to clients, I'm standing, so I'll do a standing session, but it's much more awkward to do that because I have a desk. I don't have a standing desk here. So you really want a job that keeps you upright. It's perfect. There are certain foods that you can add to meals that actually stabilize blood sugar. So I always knew about cinnamon, and I've always used cinnamon in sweeter foods to just control blood sugar. But yeah, some of these, I've had bitter melon extract previously. I used that in water, and I'm trying to remember why. It's actually a very good anti-pathogen. But yeah, berberine, rock lotus, I haven't tried. And you would do that especially with a high carb meal. You don't have to do it with any other meal, but one of my favorite snacks was always a small mashed banana with cream poured over the top and cinnamon. Oh, it was delicious. So something to think about. Okay, and then consume more fiber. Again, we're talking about it from a point of view of the insoluble fiber breaking down into the short chain fatty acids, some of which stop the conversion of glucose into fatty acids in the liver. So they actually block you making fatty acids, which can be stored as fat. Okay, so that's quite useful. So fiber might be a great idea just for that reason alone. Okay. All right, moving on to supplements from there, if we're all happy.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, there's this, it's an interesting one because a lot of people will claim that supplements are just expensive pee. And while, look, there are two things for me. The first is that your diet must be ideal, otherwise you're wasting your time or you're wasting your money. And secondly, your supplements must be extremely high quality, because otherwise you can just put a lot of stress on the liver, and frankly, in that case, it's not worth it. But I certainly, and I'm a minimalist when it comes to supplements, but having said that, sometimes it's 8 or 9 capsules at a time. I mean, and that is minimalist. And that's not even with any menopausal specific supplements, because I don't need those at this point. So yes, generally we want to be specific to, I would say, specific to age group, specific to lifestyle, specific to activity levels, because each of those nutrients will have a knock-on effect. And that's often why they do multis, because they then create a combination of the right kind of nutrients together so that they balance each other out. Okay, I had put on here, I mean, you guys know about when you hit menopause, but typically it seems to be around about, the average age is 51 to 52. And obviously menopause is considered when you haven't had a period for 12 months. Beyond that, you're said to be in menopause. In terms of those stages, I've said I'm in perimenopause. Elsner, you don't know where you are because you've got that loop in. So I guess you'd be able to tell. You'd be able to tell. It's the story of your life at the moment, not knowing where you are. But you'd be able to tell with blood tests. Those will tell you what you need to know. Menopause, obviously, as I say, is that period of the going through the 12 months without, and then postmenopause is beyond that point. Yeah, you know all about these symptoms. Jenny, I don't know how it's been for you in terms of, I mean, you've spoken about gaining weight. I know for me, thinning hair, oh, what a trauma. It's been completely freaking me out. Like, I mean, I've gone to the NHS, I've had blood tests done, I'm waiting, I've got a conversation with the doctor on Thursday. She keeps insisting it's menopause, and I keep saying, I understand that menopause leads to thinning hair, but this literally coming out, and there's no end to it. I'm going to be bald. It's just like, and I think it's partly stress, and I think it's partly menopause. So I wanted to check the stress aspect. Jenny, have you had the same experience?
Not necessarily. I've always had thin hair, so it hasn't been anything crazy, no.
Okay. And other symptoms you've experienced?
Yeah. Oh yes, all those other things. All those.
Joy.
Happy days.
Yeah. Okay. So what we want to do is obviously mitigate as many of these as we can, so that it's not, look, it's a natural process. So it's not like it's not a condition, but we want to make sure that we don't experience any extremes in with regard to this. And there are lots of ways that we can support that. And I've had some interesting feedback from clients who've used some of these. Some work very well, some don't seem to have much of an impact. I think the one that comes up most times is the adaptogenic herbs, which is the last one on this list, which improves the thyroid and adrenal function. So I've used adaptogenic herbs with clients usually for adrenal stress. You can see they lower cholesterol, stabilize blood sugar. So that's, yeah, and then the anxiety, depression. Usually that relates to, all of those symptoms tend to relate to adrenal function, which then drives thyroid function. So often when there's a thyroid issue, you look to the adrenals because that tends to be speaking to the thyroid. Other things, black cohosh, I can recall a naturopath suggesting that I had some issue when I was much younger, and he recommended black cohosh. So that seems like a good one if you're experiencing sweats. Progesterone, of course. And the interesting thing is that you've got HRT, and typically HRT, when it's promoted by, and then this isn't to be dismissive or disrespectful of mainstream medical practitioners, but they tend to promote hormonal replacement therapy that's synthetic. Other than the patch I think in South Africa is actually a bioidentical, or they would now call it I don't know, there's another term for it. Anyway, bioidentical basically means that it's practically the same as human estrogen, progesterone, etc. So my feeling is always it's much better to go for a natural, typically it's a yam based, you can get pharmaceutical grade bioidentical creams and oral progesterone. In fact, I was taking some myself. I had oral progesterone and I had a topical testosterone cream. I didn't need estrogen because I wasn't obviously anywhere near menopause. So you could, if symptoms are quite bad, you can certainly look at getting onto some of these bioidentical hormones. And you would use those if you really were struggling with some of these symptoms. And then I would definitely explore them, because you can then taper off. You can get onto these, settle yourself down, manage the symptoms, and then just slowly taper off them so that, you don't experience any extremes. Because some women can go through really, really bad menopause experience. So we've got other things here, and obviously you'll have access to the recording. So if you wanted to just have a look at these again and note some of these down, St. John's Wort is a well-known one for depression as well and anxiety, but it's also for mood and sleep. So yeah, there are a few things on here. And then, if you were ever going to consider bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, I would say that it's something that you would do temporarily, that you would slowly get yourself off it. It's not something that's a long-term solution, because we have to go through menopause. I mean, we have to make that switch. But I definitely would strongly recommend that you don't, as I say, do the synthesized version, simply because they had some real problems when they finally started doing the double-blind studies. They actually had to call that study short because of the health problems that women started experiencing from these synthesized hormones. If I remember correctly, it was either heart disease or cancer that was an issue. And I think those studies were only done in around 2002, actually. Doctors had been promoting HRT, and this is another thing that's interesting to read about. They've been promoting them for decades because doctors said that it was a good idea, and therefore more doctors said it was a good idea because other doctors said it was a good idea. And so more doctors thought because those doctors said, because those doctors said, because those doctors said. And finally in 2002, they did the studies and went, oh, we've got a bit of a problem here, you know. So, you know, who knows how many women were lost due to this experimental medication that actually turns out is probably a very bad idea indeed. So just be cautious with if you do decide that you want to, and then you have your test done, but you have them done ideally through. I'm always going to recommend a functional medical practitioner because they look at a very big overall picture, and they're more inclined to see all the other stuff that is leading towards what's happening rather than just taking a snapshot. And again, I say that with no disrespect. It's just to mainstream. It's an approach I prefer because it catches a whole lot of other things that will be influencing those tests. And I think it's just a more comprehensive way of looking at it. The body doesn't operate in snapshot views. Every system is impacting on another system, and so we have to be cognizant of that. In terms of takeaways from this session, we're on the keto or the low carb, high fat. So that's number one. We're trying to avoid, both of you are, as am I, avoiding the processed foods. If they come in every now and then, that's okay. You can manage it every now and then. It's what you do on a regular basis that's important. You've got those things that you can do to promote use of energy through the day, like your cardio in the morning and you're in a fasted state, and then your resistance training, etc. This is just summarizing. And then you might want to think about some of the supplements that were mentioned outside of HRT. But if you wanted to speak to someone else, now I think we already chatted about Charles Wilderfunk. So Jenny, if you ever wanted to see someone to just have your levels tested, have a think about, you know, where you want to go with things if you needed to actually get onto something, just to mitigate some symptoms. Charles would be a great one. We only have as far as I know, maybe things have changed since I left, but we only have 2 functional medical practitioners in Port Elizabeth. Charles Wilderfunk is one and Margot de Kooker is the other, but Margot does a lot of corporate work. So she's...
Tanya?
Yes.
Sorry, no, you didn't speak to me about him. Is he in PE?
Sorry, Elson, it might have been someone else that I spoke to. He's in Port Elizabeth, and I think I referred someone to him recently. Do you know where Russell Hill is on Main Street, Warmer? Main Road, Warmer. Okay, well, if you ever need his details, just let me know. Jenny, yeah, he's next to Russell Hill. Sorry, Elsa?
You can WhatsApp it to me because I'm going to PE on Thursday, so maybe I can go and see him.
Yes, yeah. So I'm wondering if I have I'll have a look and see if I've got his details, but otherwise you can Google him. When I send you the link, I'll remind you of his name. If I find his number, I'll attach that. Otherwise, at least you'll have his, you can just Google it.
Google. What's his surname?
Wilderfunk. So it's Volt, as in Volt. Volt.
Yeah.
ER, and then V.
Yeah.
Or V for Victor.
A-N-K.
E-A-N-K or V-A-N-C-K. No, I think it's K. Wilderfunk. Yeah. Yeah, he's Dutch. Yeah. Okay. And yeah, that might just be worth checking out. As I say, in fact, he is the one who gave me the script for the topical testosterone and oral progesterone. So yeah, something to think about. Okay, we're at the end of that session. Are you girls okay? Are there any questions? Anything you need to or want to comment on?
Have you heard of, I think it's called, oh, and I've lost the name. Renewed Balance, which is by a company, American company, I think, AIM. Also
Yeah,
topical.
I've used it. Yeah, I used it for a long time, actually, Renewed Balance. So I'm not sure how that differs from the pharmaceutical grade. Look, the first thing is that progesterone, it seems clear now, is better taken orally than topically.
Okay.
So there is that, unless you're wanting a localized progesterone. So for example, vaginal progesterone, or would that be estrogen? I'm trying to think of the treatment for example, vaginitis, or what do they call when there's the, it's almost like when you get a wasting of the vaginal muscles, and so I think they do a topical version for that. But typically speaking, it seems that oral progesterone is your better bet. So I used AIM for quite a while, and then I switched to, when I was seeing Charles, I switched to an oral progesterone and a topical testosterone. So Jenny, it might even be something ultimately that, are you on it at the moment?
Yeah, I've used it for about 3 years now, I think. Definitely does alleviate the symptoms.
Okay, then that's great. That's great. So
you
if you
use it for 3 weeks and then 1 week you don't use it.
Yeah, because you're creating a natural cycle. Yeah. And you change places on your body, I think, every few days.
Yeah, 4 days.
Yeah. Right. And I think I remember Greta, who I used to buy it from, Greta at Health Matters. I don't know if you remember Greta's store. She actually died not long ago through, I think she was hospitalized. I think she came down with COVID, and then she had some underlying issues. Sure. Yeah. But she used to say to me, put it on your face, because, and because you're going to be putting it on daily, it actually is quite good for puffing the cells. In other words, and that's the reason you change areas on your body, is because they become saturated with progesterone, and then they don't, there's something to do with the absorption of it. But she said that's perfect for your face, because it sort of plumps out the cells.
Okay.
So you're not as lined. So that's something to think about. But yes, I think if you're getting results from it, if you're getting good results, and doesn't appear to be a negative, then I think, by all means use it. A lot of my ladies would swear within a week they could feel a difference on the Renewed Balance.
Yeah.
So something maybe just to continue with. Yeah. Okay, so we're done. I'm going to send you the link for this. I'll try and see if I can find Charles's number as well. And let me know if you've got any questions as we go along. But thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
All right, well done for managing through load shedding as well.
Yeah.
Chat to you.
Goodbye.
Bye.